We're going to start with this leaf below here, and we're going to do this movement of dragging the needle down from the top down. It's a movement that we trained before, and it's going to give a gradient from the top to the bottom, darker on the top, lighter on the bottom, from dark to lighter. And the longer my movement and the faster I do this movement, the more space I have between the dots, and then less saturation. With a shorter movement, I have darker application. Now we're gonna clean to see how is that looking. So we're cleaning now, and now that I wanna do a darker spot, a darker area, I'm gonna make a circle, or quick and circle, like a cycle movement. But it's fast enough so it doesn't get super dark. I don't want a high saturation. Okay, and now we're gonna start from the middle of this leaf. And here I'll have these two movements from the top to the bottom, using the middle of the leaf to get darker, and then from the edges inwards. Okay, and this way I create this texture and this movement of the leaf, following the lines that were already marked by my stencil and by my lining. I touch the needle on the corner and drag inside. And we're going to train all these different movements with the hand. Now we can see, after we clean, that we already have a very subtle shading done. We can have a look now. And we're gonna do all types of whip shading with the 3 known movements that we did before. The first one, touching the skin and dragging the needle down. We're gonna keep doing the whip shading with this main movement, the circle. And the third one, which is the pendulum, which goes and comes back with the same quick movement. So we get 3 movements made with we're gonna fast movement and with a fast stroke. Hand movements and positions. Different types of whip shading that you can do. And we're gonna now try all these different movements and different lengths of the stroke, like how long you're gonna pull your movement, all this stuff, to see the types of shading that we can create. Remember the voltage you use and the speed in which you make a movement, and also the amount of ink that you have on your needles. All of that define the saturation of your shading. Now on the branches and on these little fruits here, these are coffee beans. And I said all of this on the last video, but they're coffee. This is a coffee branch. Let's remember we did a border line on the bottom, and this already gives us a little bit of a texture and volume, so we just follow that for this really subtle whip shading. So our whip shading goes darker, closer to that border line where the projected shading is. And the top line is a little lighter, less saturated. So here on the fruits, I didn't mark the top line because I'm just gonna build this on the shading, so it's darker with the bottom line. And where I left that mark for the light reflection, I just don't touch with any ink. You can see the movements are very short and like a half a moon, so you're always going to adapt the movement to your own designs. And we keep doing this, missing that small area that we marked on our stencil from the beginning. And when we're doing the outlining, we didn't mark that area, but I can still see here on my stencil. So I'm gonna do this really tiny shading everywhere but on that area. So that will give you that reflection, feeling that reflection effect on the fruit. And we will get a little bit darker on a few spots here and there with that tiny movement. This is another fruit and another few coffee fruits, which is the last part of this shading once you're done with all the leaves. So after doing all the fruits with a tiny moon-like pendulum movement, we're gonna clean up and have a look how this is coming out. And now we're gonna see the result of one pass of the 5-round liner with the whole lining, and then we have a double pass on these areas here where I wanted to make a shading, and then the whip shading that we just did. So on real skin, of course, we would have a darker result, but the fake skin takes much less ink. So I would recommend to have more elaborate shading, to go over and do maybe a few more layers of shading and get a better, more sophisticated result, following the same steps that we did before, which is I am going to do now. So on a drawing like this, I'm not using gray or white, and all I'm doing is just getting a few bits darker with the whip shading technique. So some places where the shading, the projected shade or shadows are there, I want to get it a little bit darker, so that's what I'm doing now. And you can build up these layers of shading, which is going to give a really nice volume and a really beautiful texture to your work. Of course, you can use some white in the end on this point of reflections, let's say on the fruits, but still you can reach a very beautiful and realistic effect with just this technique and black, the use of black. And here I can also saturate more where I want darker. If I want to reach it really darker, I can just go and oversaturate there now with layers of a really small circle, like a half circle movement. So this work was all done with a 5-round liner. You could make a selection of different liners to do this. And this is the final result of a few layers of whip shading. You could do a few more, you could do it in different places. There's a few points with more saturation, and I'm gonna show you now something with a bit more detail. Now for this more precise finishing, I can do this really subtle whip shading on some points of the design and increase the saturation of just some specific points, just spending a little more time on smaller areas, doing different movements, so I can get a stronger saturation on some places, which will bring a stronger contrast and also a stronger definition to your design. Remember, with tattooing, what gives you definition is contrast. Just gonna put a bit of ink and get off the excess and carry on with the technique. So you can do an extra layer everywhere and give a bit more depth or texture to your design. And you can fill up like other gaps or just give a little bit more shading everywhere you want to. And now we're gonna give it a wipe and have a look on the result for now. So the final result of a whole work done with a 5-round liner with just one needle, so you never had to switch needles or to set up different machines. And you can get these results where you see shading and light points and reflection, and you can do a pretty much realistic work if you want to with just one needle and a couple of different applications of the technique. Which can be done with different needles depending on your technical needs.